Hi there, everyone. I'm Michelle Teague from A Teague of Your Own.
And I'm Betty Novak from Life Path Associates, LSC. We're really excited to have you come to Career Aspirations of a Different Generation. Um, it's really important today to really think of careers differently. The COVID has made that so. And so there are a lot of stories in the media. We're seeing it every day, why people are going back to work, why people aren't going back to work, why people are resigning. Um, we also see why companies are downsizing, right sizing, and some are even going away, which is unfortunate. I mean, we just saw Yellow Freight actually close its doors this week. So there are a lot of people that were freight drivers. However, the good news about something like that is that they can transition their career and their job to the other line, freight lines, and other people who need truck drivers because we have a shortage. So
Yeah.
that's one good news for that industry. So,
Mhm.
but a new study provides evidence about what these generational changes may mean for employees, because there are some changes. And gee, the demise of our traditional career thoughts are changing because of the post-pandemic COVID era. And so we're going to talk about that a little bit. There's a current study by Lyons, Schweitzer, and NG Ning in 2015 that analyzed data from 4 generations: the baby boomers, the X, the Ys, and the Zs or millennials. And they all are currently working in the workforce to provide, greater understanding to this study with regards to career patterns and how different generations are handling some of the differences and the changes. And we'll go into that. Michelle and I will go into that later. So, Michelle, you want to talk about the evolving nature of careers because
Yeah,
that's important.
it is, and it's very interesting because when you look at the baby boomers and even the generation before them, the greatest generation, what you saw was it was a very linear type
Mhm.
of career path or career progression where people stayed with the same company for many, many years. They started at one position and then they would just start climbing up the ladder through promotions and progress through their career. And it was very linear. Whatever career path they chose, that's pretty much what they stayed in. And they just continued to go through that. During the 21st century, we saw a change in that. And the reality is it started a little bit before then, where you started seeing changes from one industry to the other, from one career path to the other. And different generations have been having an impact on how those changes have happened. Careers are affected by the downsizing that you were talking about, and by this growing disruption that people have had in their work life and in their family life. And what's happened is the new career perspective. It's giving workers today the opportunity for these shifting career paths that are happening kind of dynamically. It's really popping up that what we've seen over the past few decades here. And sometimes people are moving up, sometimes they're moving laterally, sometimes they're even moving down because maybe they're going into a different industry or to a different path. And because of that, you're seeing a wide array of changes happening in the progression of people's career paths. In the past, the research did not typically consider different generations of employees and what they were doing in the workforce at a specific time. So when you looked at, like I said, the greatest generation, they would generally stay in the same company, and they would have a very linear career path. When promotions were available, individuals from that particular generation built their legacies based on tenure, based on upward progression, and they stayed within a single organization. We're finding, though, that's not the case with generations after that. So why don't you talk a little bit about the research findings from this particular study for us, Betty?
And, you know, remember we talked about the 5 paths that I have a diagram of, so I'll put it on the coaching for two coaches, so with 2 coaches, so they can see what you were talking about more graphically. But yeah, career mobility includes all of the changes in job, organization, and occupation, as well as status changes. What does that mean? It means that what was said is that jobs can change, or you may even change organizations and keep the same job because there's no upward mobility. And it also means that the occupations may change because we're seeing more technology, and we don't even know what how AI is going to change anything. Really, people are just guesstimating. So, but using new measures to precisely examine career mobility, the authors of this survey had a sample of 2,555 professionals in the mature, born prior to 1946. And that is before my time. That's my parents. And baby boomers, 1946 to 1964, as well as Generation X, 1965 to 1979, which is Michelle, and millennials, 1980 or later generations, because we're not talking about the new generation that's coming in, that's graduating high school and starting to graduate college. So past research did not typically consider that several generations of employees may be in the workforce at one time. So we thought as one exited, the other moved up. And nothing is said in here, but what happened is those that moved up got crowded by us retirees that are returning because we have the wisdom and we need the money. So in order to examine generational differences in the workforce, the researchers had to take into account the varying career and life stages of the different generations in the workforce. And we'll talk about that. So the authors provide evidence of the social changes of each generation. And for example, the generation before 1946, which was the generation that was in World War II. Mm-hmm. And so it was a similar cohort that benefited from economic growth because they were before and during World War II, they had different things that happened to them. The Great Depression, 1929, and then going into World War II. And we hadn't had the wonderful abundance of the 1950s and late 40s yet. So things there was something to be said about looking at them. So these individuals felt like promotions were the thing to happen. And like you said, getting the gold watch after 20 years. I mean, my father-in-law did that. So the research findings found a trend of increased career mobility for each successive generations, the baby boomers X, Y, and Z. And so, for instance, the millennials had the highest level of job and organization mobility, yet they aren't staying anywhere. I mean, you as a manager really need to make sure you understand them, and they want to feel like they are valued in the organization. So they are twice as likely to change jobs and organizations as Michelle's generation, the Gen Xers. 3 times as likely as the baby boomers, and more as likely as the matures. Generation X had the highest rate of job changes per year, followed by the baby boomers. So because organizations are requiring that workers adapt and be flexible to changing jobs. Now, changing jobs doesn't mean you're changing employers. But it could mean you're changing jobs and have to change employers, making a career change and transition. But really, it just meant that the organizations are changing what they do, and we need to be flexible to be retrained, reskilled, upskilled, and move on to something else. While the rate of job mobility within an organization increased over the generations, the rate of which people leave organizations to take new jobs did not change much from generation to generation. So the baby boomers move slightly more. I'm not an example of a baby boomer because I've had about 13 employers, but I found out that, for example, I started in sales in retail, so I had management experience. But after that, I was teaching, and then I was training, and then I managed trainers and so forth. And then I went in the federal government and human resource development, employee development, and organizational development, and so forth. So I had my own company. And so I started seeing this trend of staying this way, but it was different.
Well,
So
and
how
part
did
of
you?
it,
Yeah, go ahead.
part of what you were talking about, Betty, like you said, you worked for 13 different employers. But one of the things that baby boomers would do is they would leave if they were going to have a promotion opportunity. Um,
Yes.
and if you had more responsibility and higher pay because of that responsibility, they would leave because of that. And that's what you would see with a lot of the baby boomers is they weren't as tied to companies as their parents necessarily were. However, what they were looking for were these opportunities to advance in their careers. If they had it at the same company, great. If they didn't, they would move on.
That's right. I mean, they still, all the generations want to be upward and
Yeah.
mobile in organizations that they're in, but the younger ones aren't afraid to move. The older ones, like my generation, would just sit back and complain when they went home, and some of them got burnt out and got sick and so forth. And I saw my mother stay 20 years somewhere where I didn't see was a healthy environment for her, but she was plodding along, and she got money, pretty good money. So, but the organizations are implicated. I mean, there are organizations implications about this. The authors provided that for human research strategy, they provided advice for research strategy. That it was to combat the high job mobility. I can't talk. Provide short-term benefits to attract and retain employees. And HR was pretty busy with regards to being able to support that. They wanted them to appeal to the younger generations, provide shorter career milestones to help them progress rapidly, which is what they wanted. And if upward mobility is not possible, provide job opportunities such as job rotation. In the federal government, we have details where you go somewhere else, and you might even be offered a job there, and your boss has to let you go, actually. And the retiring or former employees, but were coming back, or partnering with other organizations to appeal to employees' pursuit of individual goals. So what meant is if somebody was in one part of the agency or in one part of the company, if they felt they wanted to move over to another part, then they had to have a discussion, but the employers were willing to do that because they wanted their people to stay. They wanted to re-engage their people. I think today it's tougher though than it was before.
I think so. And like you said, you've got a lot of HR professionals who are looking, how can we hold on to the good people that we have? Because retention rates right now are not that good. And with all these people who are moving around, one of the things that you're looking at is what can I do to hold on to some of these people? And one of the things that you had talked about was with younger generations, providing them with shorter career milestones. And that's very different than what they've done in the past. In the past, that once they promoted somebody, they kind of figured in the back of their mind, all right, this person's going to be here for a few more years. I don't have to worry about them because I just promoted them into this higher role. We'll let them figure it out. We'll let them stay in there for a while before they get promoted to the next one. Younger generations aren't looking for that. Younger generations are looking for quicker route to get higher up in the organizational chain. And if you can't show them that there are different milestones along the way, they're going to leave before you get back to them with those opportunities for promotion.
They're
So
also looking for flexibility. Sorry, my dogs are leaving now. Flexibility. I didn't know they were here. Flexibility of the work or workday too, because they're more technologically savvy, and some of that means that they want to go on their social media if they finish their job. It's not looking like you and I. We'd be looking for more work, and I'm not trying to paint them with that brush only, but from my clients and what they've said is that I wish, they'd come to me and ask for more work rather than doing social media or whatever, because the other employees are unhappy with that. They think they're getting more than they are. So communication is really important too. But between
and there's a different belief system when it comes to younger workers, where for them it's all right, this is what you hired me to do. I got it done. Now the rest of the time is mine to do whatever I want. And as opposed to, like you said, you'd have older generations that would go back and say, all right, what else do you have for me? Because I'm sitting around here and I don't have anything to do. Or they would create more stuff. They'd figure out for themselves what else they could work for. Younger generations don't seem to be doing that. Like you said, once they're finished doing what it is that they had to get done, they're moving on to other pursuits that don't necessarily go over well in the workplace.
That's true. That's true.
Yeah.
And then also a turnover becomes high because they're going to find somebody. And we aren't talking about, we talked at work at home. There are new articles about the perception of people working at home. That will be another session or podcast about that. But just to summarize, employers want people coming back into the office, and they aren't. Well, people are investigating why they're not, because I hear that they think they are lower on productivity, and I'd like to see that evidence. How do you measure productivity? And so that's another thing that different generations would say, I'm out of here. If they want me to come back to work, I don't want to go and commute and really be exhausted by the time I get to work.
Yeah, one of the jobs that I worked in years and years ago, my boss would measure my productivity by how many reams of paper I would go through. Because the more work I did, the more I had to print different things, and as a result, you'd go through a whole lot of paper. And the more paper you went through, the more you were doing, and that's how he measured how productive I was.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, the employers don't think about how many hours they're working. They think they're working less. And you've met clients, and I've met clients that they're working 14 hours. And it's not that they don't want to work or they want to work that long. It's just that they can take time out and take breaks. And during those breaks, they might do an errand or they might do this, but they're working longer hours, and you have to really talk to them about keeping an 8 or 10-hour day and not working into the night, or they'll burn themselves out even at home. So, yeah.
All right.
So what are different generations' aspirations? What do you think they are?
Oh, well, that's a great question, Betty, because when you look at the different generations, do they have different aspirations there in the workplace? And Inez Tejera wrote an article about this. She took a look at one of the companies that she was working at, Canella, and she wrote an article about the different generations and their different aspirations. And basically, she was looking to see, are they motivated by different things? Are they trying to achieve different things? Do they have different ideas about what their career paths are supposed to be? and she wanted to take a look and see about the possibility of, you've got these four different generations in the workplace. Are the team gatherings and meetings that they're having, and they're interacting with each other, are things going well for them? Are the combinations of these generations getting along in the workplace? And are they all working towards similar goals? Or do they have some very different ideas of what it's supposed to be like there in the workplace? And is that causing some challenges for the companies that they're working with? Because the reality is, when you've got, you know, the millennials, you've got, which, and you've got generation Y and Z, which millennials are falling in there. They're a whole lot more tech savvy than some of the baby boomers that are out there, and even some of Generation X. Generation X was kind of bridged that gap between uh, older forms of technology and newer forms of technology. And as a result, a lot of times they've had to keep up with some of the changes that have gone on. Whereas with newer generations, the technology has always been there, and they haven't necessarily had to learn it there at the workplace. They've already know how to use it all their lives. They've had this. And so you've got these different generations and in the workplace, and it's kind of interesting to take a look at what their aspirations are and how they differ from one another. So, Betty, what about those baby boomers who are out there?
Well, the baby boomers are interesting. They were post World War II. So they were during a time of turbulent time. The first was that it was prosperous during the Eisenhower and Truman administration. And then in 1960s, we had, a lot of different things happen: Vietnam War, Korea first, the Vietnam War. And so things got a little bit shaky, and the baby boomers were the ones that went out and actually complained about it publicly. But in the job, they prefer to be recognized for their experience rather than their innovativeness, which I found to be interesting based on what she found, because maybe baby boomers don't seem to be innovative or that innovative, because they were taught by their parents that if you work and you learn, you work hard and you learn hard, and you show skill, that you're going to be able to be a good employee and they'll want to promote you and so forth. They didn't really talk about innovativeness, but innovations were happening all during that time as technology started creeping in, and a new HR law or policy was happening. But yeah, we said if we have an experience and we keep adding skills, we get trained and so forth, we're all good. So that's what the baby boomers really felt at that time. Generation X, though, because I had some that worked under me, they wanted flexible working hours, with the possibility of working remotely. And that's when flexi place started coming in. And some people, some corporations and some agencies were better than others with regards to flexi place. So two aspirations which have become the order of the day since the outbreak of the pandemic, especially for Gen X's, is the choosing a new job, because they did other things while the pandemic was happening. I mean, a lot of learning at home for both generations happened, but the baby boomers were trying to think of when they're going to retire. And the Gen X was saying, well, what do I need to know more of to be able to jump back in and really be valued and get a better job, and be able to negotiate working from home. So they, post-COVID world made a great difference in their occupational life.
Yeah. for Generation X, like I said, this is the generation that kind of gets sandwiched in between a lot of things. For years, all you heard about were the baby boomers. And as they started to retire, Generation X thought, okay, well, finally, A, we're going to get to move up into these leadership roles, and B, we're finally going to get some attention. No, that didn't happen because baby boomers decided, oh, I'm not going to retire because I can keep working and earning. And as long as I'm healthy, why bother? And B, the ones that did retire have returned back to the workplace to help out because there's a lot of employers out there who are in need of employees, and they're bringing back some of these baby boomers who retired because A, they need the money, and B, the workplaces need the knowledge and the experience to come back in. But the interesting thing about Generation X is we were the original latchkey kids. We were the ones who were brought up to be very independent and to learn how to take care of ourselves. And one of the things about Generation X is this is where you start to see that term work-life balance come into play. And you would have a lot of my generation who would take a look at what was going on in the workplace and start to say, you know what, there's more to life than just this. There's a whole lot out there, and I wanna travel while I'm young and can still do things. I want to go experience some of what life has to offer. Yeah, I'm still gonna work and I'm still gonna uh, be contributing there, but I've also got all this other stuff that's going on, and this is where you start to see that transition of the whole work-life balance movement is with Generation X. And uh, you've got a lot more involved other than just who was there in their workplace. My generation tended to look at the world as a smaller place. And because we knew with the technology that was happening, we could communicate with people all around the world. And the world became a smaller place for us.
Well, I want to say something about generation baby boomers, because you just made me think that a majority of us, I don't say everybody, because there were a lot of women mothers that worked along with their husbands, or if something had happened to their husbands during World War II, right? We lost a lot of men.
Yeah.
And so women worked. The one thing that happened though, which is interesting, and it's more the mature generation, is those women worked through World War II. And so, and my mother was part of that too, because she was of that generation and she worked. And then all of a sudden the men returned and they were thrown out of their jobs and said, go back and be a housewife again. So a lot of my mother's generation, we were housewives, and they helped their children, eat properly, get to and from school, do extracurricular activities, actually learn more, have more time to learn more about art, culture, entertainment, so forth. And yet we were asked to do more. We had to be, what's the word? My mother expected me to get on the honor society.
Yeah.
Yeah. And if you didn't, it wasn't a night. It was a little dark at home for a while. But, but she promoted us to learn and be creative and innovative. But so we had somebody at home to rely on. And our father came home at a decent time. So it was like everybody ate at the table, which was not true of your generation.
No.
Everybody did not eat at the table, at the same table, type of thing. I mean, maybe, and even food was brought in more often than not, right? So that you could eat at different times depending on when people showed up.
Exactly. And crock pots became big.
Oh, that's right.
And part of that was because You could put something in there in the morning before you left for work, and that way when people came home, dinner was ready, and you could eat whenever. It freed up a lot of time when it came to that. Very different way of thinking when it came to preparing meals and making sure people had a hot meal. It was a different way to think and to interact because you're right, not everybody would eat at the same time.
Well, I
And
think fast food grew too.
oh yeah.
Fast
Um,
food grew really big during your generation there. I mean, Howard Johnson's was my big place to go. Maybe McDonald's on occasion. There weren't that many.
Well, when you look at McDonald's and when you look at kids' meals that they would push, it started in the 70s and 80s.
That's true.
And that's what happened with my group is we were on the tail end of all of that. And so, of course, when we started having children, it made perfect sense for us to take them to all of these fast food places because that's what we grew up with.
And one of the career occupations was management,
Yeah.
supervision. You had middle management, you had upper management, executive management, you had frontline management, you had team leaders. Those were emerging because when you think of your parents doing the job, it was like, I have a boss and I have to do the job. And my boss has a boss, but nobody talked about how you became the boss.
No.
I mean, maybe you might go through some training, but it was more mentoring and just being there and being there for a certain amount of time, and then you might be promoted because there was a spot. But our generations, we wanted to be trained and we wanted to be promoted, and yours was more online, mine was more in person because I trained supervision for about 10 years. So yeah, it was interesting.
And then with the generations after us, when you look at Generation Y, um, uh, they're the millennials. They're the ones that were born there between roughly 1980 and 2000. They started in the workplace there in the early 2000s, and they are very different from previous generations in the fact that millennials need approval and mentoring because they believe that that's the only way that they can evolve. That's the only way that they can become better professionals. They put an emphasis on learning. They put an emphasis on constant personal improvement and career progression. They didn't necessarily look at the workplace as somewhere where you go, you put in your time and you leave. This was someplace that they go to get personal and professional satisfaction. So the workplace had to change because of them, and they had this uh, where this whole concept of tying themselves to their career progression, and they made it somebody else's responsibility to make sure that they were prepared for making that transition. They didn't take on that responsibility themselves, which I think was a definite shift in some of the concepts of what we were seeing for previous generations.
Yeah, and the one thing that's not talked about specifically in this survey or this research is that the internet
Yeah.
came and the cell phone. I mean, my first cell phone was a block. It was pretty big. And the next one was a very big flip phone, you
Uh-huh.
know. I was so happy when they brought out the single little phone, you know, with little keys on them. I didn't get an iPhone first. I got one of the others, but you know, I have an iPhone now. But and it changed it because training could be on the go.
Yeah.
And it, I think really the COVID staying at home really strengthened that idea with the Zoom and other Citrix and WebEx and other types of platforms
Yeah.
that could support online learning. And it's become like the almost only way to learn,
Yes.
which has its good points and its bad points, but at least people are learning and upskilling. But the internet was a major change,
Yes.
and it really changed our world. And then we had, phones that we could take with us.
Well, and to that point, Generation Z, which is the most recent entry into the workplace, they are the most tech savvy of all of the generations out there. Because for them, the internet's always been there. For them, they've always had uh, cell phones, that they've always had smartphones. They didn't have those previous generations of cell phones where, like you said, you didn't have a screen on there. You couldn't really there was no interface where there were just buttons and even if the very early forms of texting, you had to hit, the number two key a couple of times to get to the letter B, and then you had to go to the next key to figure out, and it was still all numeric and alpha based. There wasn't any touch screens. There wasn't any of that. Generation Z has no idea what that was like.
Right.
Uh, they always what they've seen has been the newer forms of technology. And because of that, they are very tech savvy. They are extremely innovative in the way that they think, because for them, technology has constantly been changing. You didn't have these large gaps in between when something was introduced, taking a long time to actually get used to it and integrate it, before people would figure out how can we improve this, and having many years happen before you would see changes and improvements in the technology. What's happening now is, think about it, with Apple, with companies like IBM, when it comes to computers, you've got changes happening just about every year. With Microsoft, they would have one release after another after another, and it's the same with cell phones. You have this constant change every single year, and you have to be able to keep up with it. That's what the Generation Z has been doing all their lives. Is they've constantly been going through these changes. Um, with them, when it comes to the workplace, they strive to find their dream job that fits their personality and gives them more importance than the importance that they places on diversity, on inclusion, and on social causes. And the workplaces had to change because of that. They've had to show that they are good citizens of the world. They have to show that they're much more progressive in their ways of thinking out there in the world. And because of that, this newer generation is really starting to have an impact on how companies are interfacing with people, not just in the workplace, but with their customers.
Yeah, they're accepting the woke
Yeah.
ideology, which is interesting. Right now I'm hearing that there's more pushback for it because productivity has fallen with regards to that. So that's going to be a whole different changing the mind,
Yes.
getting changing the mindset. But you have to do it carefully because those are their values, and you don't want to stomp on the
No.
values either. And one of the things I was thinking that they are able to, when I get an app, when my app or my little blue A shows up and says, you need to change and you have a security update on your software. You have to, put it in or you're going to get in trouble. And it takes a little while and sometimes it's different and you have to figure it out. Even now I do anyway, but they're used to it. They just hit the switch and there it is, and they're up. They put VPNs all over the place on it and things like that, and I admire them for that. The other thing though that is being seen is that they're becoming insular to a certain extent. That they are social, but they aren't social face to face. They're
No.
not comfortable being social face to face. And so that sort of changes the depth and breadth of communication, decision making about interpersonal relationships, and being, it's sort of like in our generation, the boss would say, take a memo and send it out, as opposed to, well, I'm calling them, or I'm going to Zoom them a message to get on Zoom with me, or Skype, or Facebook, FaceTime, and so forth.
Yep.
And it's really changed. Then we'll see how it changes their personal lives too over the years.
It's interesting because there are a lot of different platforms out there that are preferred by different generations.
Oh, that's true.
And when you look at something like Slack, Slack is a newer platform that tends to be preferred by the millennials. Generation Z doesn't like it as much though, and
Slack
they're
is more international too, because
yes, it is.
I was doing with internationals, and they had me open up a Slack account, and I
Yep.
said, Slack, what's that? It's a very interesting platform, though. It's sort of easy, actually.
Yeah, it's great for sharing information, very easy to share files and to get things to go back and forth. What's truly interesting though is that with both millennials and Generation Z, they're getting away from using email. They're not necessarily looking at email, they're looking at all these different platforms that they're using for information. And I'm hearing different people there in the workforce who are, Generation X, or even some of the baby boomers who are complaining about these newer generations because they're not checking their emails. They're not using those types of communication trails. And you've got people who are getting upset about it because they're just like, why didn't you respond to my email? Oh, you sent me an email? Let me go look. And all of a sudden, and they've got, hundreds of unread emails in there. And it's because that's not their preferred communication route. They're using other platforms for that, to share information. And if you don't key in on that, you're going to have this big communication gap within an organization.
Well, we saw this happen with texting.
Yes.
Texting all of a sudden became really big. I use it. I tell my clients, text me first, and I'll go look for the email, because I have so many emails coming in. And I prefer actually to text. But you and I keep in touch through LinkedIn,
Yep.
and that's different. Other people keep in touch with Instagram,
Yeah.
or chat, messages rather, and Facebook and so forth. So it is changing. Even our generations are having to adjust to what's faster, and we know the person will get it.
Yes.
But like you and I do, we mainly work through LinkedIn, but messaging in LinkedIn, but we end up also sending an email to say, hey, I just sent you something. So email is used in a different way than it did. You're right. It's not the end all be all. It's a little slow.
Yeah.
I think that's another thing that happens. It's not very fast, and things get lost. Messages get lost in the junk and trash, and that doesn't necessarily happen in the other types of platforms. It will be interesting to see how the organizations change.
I agree.
They sort of need to reevaluate all their people and how people are communicating more often.
Exactly.
So,
excellent.
But as you can see, we only touch the surface of really what has been happening before and now. So, and probably in the future. So, but a number of things really changed the workplace. World War II, um, the internet, the other technology like phones, portable phones, notebooks that you could, laptop notebooks,
Oh, yeah.
as well as, the biggest one now is COVID, that
Yeah.
we have to stay home, which is not typical of definitely of our country. That to stay home, it was difficult for us to do, and I'm sure all through the world it was really difficult to stay home that long and not be able to interface with family and friends and even the office if it
Right.
was open. So yeah, we're still recovering from that.
Yes. Awesome. Well, this has been a great discussion once again on the different generations and what some of their aspirations are there in the workplace. Um, we had a couple of other topics that came up during this discussion that I have a feeling we're going to be diving into here in the near future. So, thanks everybody for joining us. We love having these discussions. We hope that you find them valuable, and let us know what you'd like to hear about.
Yes, please. We have a number of topics, but we really want to be able to address yours, whether you have questions or you want a topic that you would like us to look at and introduce into Coffee with Two Coaches. We're here for you. That's why Michelle and I created Coffee with Two Coaches.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everybody. Have a great week.
Yes.